This one's for all the cord cutting and streaming parents out there. Hi folks, and welcome to the Cord Cutters News Channel. This week, we're taking a look at the state of parental controls on some of the biggest streaming services out there. They all do things a little differently, so if you've been trying to figure out how to manage the types of media your little ones have access to, we hope this one helps. These are 5 things you should know about streaming service parental controls. Number 1. What do parental controls actually do? Okay, so as we'll soon see, the exact features and options differ from one streaming platform to another, but generally speaking, parental controls have a common goal: to give parents and guardians more control over what younger viewers can watch. Some services might offer fine-grained filters, while others may have better protection against workarounds, but they all operate on the same basic premise of keeping inappropriate content out of reach. But we should point out up front that no set of parental controls is perfect, and they won't take the place of consistent, healthy communication between you and your kids. By that I mean there's no such thing as set it and forget it parental controls, where you can create a profile for your child and then just walk away. Instead, they're designed to help parents not assume all their responsibilities. And if you approach them with those expectations, I think it helps put parental controls in a more realistic mindset. And for this roundup, we're focusing on 4 of the biggest streaming services available: Netflix, Prime Video, Hulu, and Disney+. And we have other videos planned for the future that highlight parental controls on other major services and streaming devices, so stay tuned. Now, with all of that being said, let's dive into how to set up parental controls in some of the top streaming services currently available. Number 2. How do you set up parental controls? Like we said in the earlier section, there's no single universal approach to parental controls, and all the various streaming services have their own takes on what these features actually offer. Generally speaking, though, these parental controls include the option to create individual user profiles, including those meant specifically for kids and/or younger adults. Depending on the service in question, you might have to use a web browser instead of, say, an iPhone app to manage your various account settings, so maybe have your laptop handy just in case. In general, enabling parental control starts in the settings or account management section of your streaming service. And again, some services require logging into a web browser to get to those options. And once you're there, you might see options to create new profiles for your family members, and here you can often set access privileges on a profile-by-profile basis. Some, as we'll soon see, let you designate a given profile as a kids-only account, which can open up or lock away certain options. But let's look at some specific streaming services to get a better idea of what's going on. Number 3. Parental controls on major streaming services. Alright, it's time to dig into some specific streaming services, and we've chosen to highlight 4 of the biggest out there. So in this section, we're going to talk about Netflix, Prime Video, Hulu, and Disney+. Again, parental controls can differ from service to service, but I think showcasing these in particular could help a fairly large percentage of the audience out there, and can give you a base level of what to expect on other services. So with all of that being said, let's take a look first at Netflix. Netflix has been at this whole streaming thing for a while now, so it's perhaps no surprise to see a variety of parental features on offer here. You can create up to 5 individual profiles on your Netflix account, and aside from the primary account holder's profile, you can designate any of them as kids profiles. And within those kids profiles, you can fine-tune the age ratings that are allowed, from TVY all the way to NC-17 with several stops in between. You can also opt to display the Netflix Kids interface, which limits what's on display to kids-only titles. And you can even select specific shows or movies if there are certain titles you want to make sure are out of reach of younger eyeballs. There are also settings to turn off autoplay of the next episode within a series and the autoplaying of previews while browsing. And you can check out the viewing history on those profiles to see if anything out of the ordinary pops up. It should also be noted that editing and changing these content features often requires you to re-enter your account password. That's another way services can make it a little bit harder for non-account owners to adjust the settings to their own liking. And on the parent side, you can attach a PIN code to adult profiles to make accessing them more difficult, though not impossible, of course. Over on Prime Video, you can also create up to 6 individual profiles and set any of those secondary logins as kids accounts. That restricts content to ratings of 12 and under and disables purchases while using that account. Search results and suggestions are also limited on kids profiles. You also get app-wide age range options to choose from, though instead of industry standards like PG-13 or TVMA, you'll see more general age settings like 7, 13, or 16. If you enable those limits, accessing content above those settings would require the entry of a PIN code. And that's one way Prime Video differs from, say, Netflix. Instead of assigning PIN codes to individual profiles, Prime Video lets you set content limits for all profiles at once on a device-by-device basis. It's also important to note that since you can't lock a profile with its own PIN code, it's relatively easy to exit out of a kid's profile and load up an adult account, and that's where the app-wide age restrictions come in. Kids might be able to search for more mature content within a parent's profile, but if that PIN access is enabled, they'll need to enter that code to actually watch that more mature title. What's more, you can also set specific age limits per device, so if you want to limit access specifically on your kid's iPad, you can choose that device from the list of hardware that has access to your Prime Video account. There are exceptions to that, however. The Prime Video app itself points out that viewing restrictions on Fire TV devices and Xbox apps have to be set directly on those devices. And you can also require a PIN code for any purchases made through Prime Video, which again should make it more difficult for kids to gain access to undesirable content. And as with Netflix, you'll often be asked to re-enter your account password if you're trying to change parental features. Hulu's approach to parental controls is a bit less fine-grained than what you might see on Netflix or Prime Video. You do get the option to create multiple user profiles, up to 6 in Hulu's case, and you do indeed have the ability to designate any of those secondary logins as kids' profiles. However, it lacks the different age range settings of the earlier services we discussed. Instead, here a kids profile can only access content through Hulu's Kids Hub, which includes shows and movies with ratings of up to TV PG or PG. And as far as other limitations go, there's currently no feature to add a PIN code to adult profiles, so younger ones can basically exit out of their kids-only profile and log on to your account to gain access to a wider range of content, so heads up there. To sum up, Hulu does offer kid-focused content and kids-only profiles, but be aware of some of its limitations and shortcomings. And stay tuned to CordCuttersNews.com, because if and when any of these streaming services announce major updates to their parental settings, we'll be sure to let you know. And then there's Disney Plus, which might be a bit younger than the other options we're discussing today, but its parental controls are still worth talking about. You can create up to 7 profiles and designate those non-primary accounts for kids only. If you select that option, you might notice the app automatically turning off features like Group Watch and Autoplay. There's also an option called Kid-Proof Exit that's designed to make it harder to leave a kid's profile either intentionally or accidentally. When it's enabled, you'll see a prompt to enter a numeric code that's spelled out on the screen. So yeah, it might not necessarily stop older kids, but it does make it a little harder to unintentionally leave a profile. And you can also assign a PIN code to individual profiles so users can restrict access to adult profiles. And yes, adjusting certain options in the settings menu will require re-entering your password, again, just for safety's sake. Number 4, a quick note on parental controls and streaming devices. Okay, it's one thing to set up kids' profiles and content filters on streaming services, but don't forget about the actual streaming devices you're using. Before we sign off on this video, we wanted to remind you all that for all the parental controls we've discussed here, their power and their effectiveness basically starts and ends with the apps themselves. And if you're like many streaming households out there, you likely have multiple streaming services and streaming devices populating your home. So you'll want to look into the features of each if you want some more comprehensive content safeguards. For example, devices from Roku, Apple, and others can often allow parents to restrict access to certain apps or limit downloading new apps without your permission, or at least without your passwords. And again, we have more videos planned for the future that dive into device-specific parental controls. For now, though, we definitely wanted to remind folks that it's not just the services themselves you should be aware of. It's also the devices you're using. Number 5, ways your kids can get around parental controls. And lastly, it's important to remember that no parental controls, no matter how extensive or how password protected they are, none of them are completely foolproof and tamper-proof. Clever and tech-savvy kids can, and probably will, find ways around content blocks, perhaps like there are challenges meant to be overcome. And it can be as easy as just knowing your passwords or PIN codes so they can override parental controls when they want. And in other cases, it can be as simple as switching from their profile to yours, which likely opens up a much wider range of content for them to choose from. And plus, your kids might also be more aware of and more familiar with what specific parental controls can and can't do within a given service. For example, maybe you forgot to click a checkbox when you set up their account that, say, makes it harder for them to switch between accounts. If you're going to set up parental controls, just take a moment to see what each service has to offer. And I think the main point here is that parental controls can be a useful feature, but they're not perfect and they're certainly not infallible. And they're definitely not a substitute for talking with your kids about what they watch and the lessons and information they take away from that content. Healthy media consumption starts at a young age, and communication and trust are still key here. So please don't expect more out of parental controls than they can actually deliver. Wrapping it all up. So there you go. Those were 5 things you should know about parental controls on some of the top streaming services. And in case you're wondering, no, we did not forget about live TV streaming services in this roundup. We'll actually be taking a look at those as well in the near future. For now though, thanks again for tuning in. If you haven't done so already, please do consider clicking those like and subscribe buttons down below. They really do help our channel out, and we'd certainly appreciate it. And until next time, my name is Philip Palermo. We'll see you next week. Take care.